very much to everyone for joining us today. Our talk today is sort of in honour of next Monday, the 14th. Love is in the air, and we're going to be having a little think about objects in the British Museum collections which speak to love and affection between people, but also of place and of deities. So the different forms of love, affection, respect that are encapsulated and demonstrated by a number of objects from our collection. So as usual, I am going to start by pulling up my talk for today. Here we go, pick up my little pointer and we can begin. Love is in the air. Museum objects which express affection for people and places. And we're going to begin with a set of objects known as Posey rings. Now, Posey rings were usually given as an affectionate gift. They actually derive their name from the French word posé, or poem, and they were popular for communicating messages of love between the giver and the recipient. And you can see on the examples here on screen that the messages can be inscribed inside, and in early examples you will usually find the lettering inside the ring band, since wearing the words against the skin was believed to increase their power, the potency of the message. Later on, message could also be written on the outside of the ring, and the phrases themselves were usually written in Latin, Old French or Old English. And until about 1350, the lettering was usually done in the Lombardic script, with later examples, such as the one at the bottom, using the Gothic script. Now, certain inscriptions appear on multiple rings, and this indicates that the goldsmiths making these rings had a book of stock phrases which the clients would then choose to be added to the ring that they were buying and then gifting. If the saying is more abstract, it usually indicates that that is the individual request of the buyer. So let's have a look at what we've got on the two examples we have here on the screen. So at the top, we have a Jewish gold wedding or betrothal ring, and it's got a Hebrew inscription running around the inside. And the ring is what we call a D-section ring. And that meant that if you were to cut through the band, the shape of the profile would be like a D with a flat back and then a curved outer edge, which you can see on the band running around the outside. And this particular ring was made in England, and it has a maker's mark of IC. Now the inscription, which runs around the inside, reads, "Good luck to Joshua and Judith Safady. May their rock and redeemer guard them." Now, we know that Joshua and Judith were married in London on the 13th of April, 1699. And at this date, the Jewish congregation in London would have worshipped in a synagogue in Creek Church Lane, which was the original synagogue of the resettlement Jewish community in London. The more famous Bevis Marks synagogue was completed 2 years later, in 1701. So we have a probable location for where this object would have been used. Now, experts say it could be a wedding or a betrothal ring. I think the fact that it has such explicit inscription, which is part of a Jewish marriage ceremony, would seem to indicate that this is a marriage ring rather than a betrothal ring. And we know that following their marriage, they both continued to live in London, and we have their deaths recorded. Joshua continued to live in London until he died on the 31st of December, 1722, and Judith herself died on the 23rd of February, 1747. So we have here an example of an object of love and affection, which is part of a ceremony, a set of behaviours which mark a specific life event for those two people. The ring down below is also a gold love ring, but this one is not linked to any particular life event. It appears to be an example of a Posey ring, which would have been exchanged during the courting period between two lovers. It has a very broad, flat hoop, which is itself divided horizontally into bands. You can see here there's an upper band and a lower band, which runs all the way around the back of the ring. And then on the outside, there is a sapphire bead in a circular bezel. Now, if we start with the interior, which we see here on the right of the screen, you can see that engraved into the gold is an image of a woman holding a squirrel. And a squirrel in medieval times was a symbol of consistency, was a symbol of inconsistency. So the way that the woman is negating the fact that the squirrel is a sign of inconsistency is the fact that she has the squirrel on a leash, thereby turning it into a symbol of controlled consistency. She herself, with the squirrel, sit amongst flowers and foliage. The ring was made in England in the 1400s and has lettering on the inside and also running around the outside. And this lettering is in French, and it's rather an unusual inscription. This is what it translates as: a nominative report is given to me, the dative, by the genitive word in spite of the accusative. And it seems to be a play on words which relates to 14th century French grammar and a play on the poetry that was being produced in France at this time. So it's sort of a combination of a declaration of love through the medium of wordplay and puns, relating the person's expression of love to the rules of Latin with the nominative and the dative and the accusative. It also has on the inside more explicit expression of love, and the inscription on the inside reads, "My love is in an infinitive which wants to be in the relative." So again, picking up on the idea in the inscription on the outside of a play on words and an idea of using grammar to express the idea that you wish your love to last forever, but slightly more explicitly on the inside. And remember that the inside is the side of the ring which would be next to the skin, and therefore is the side of the ring where the words would have been deemed to have greater power when being worn by the wearer. Now, continuing with the idea of rings given as an expression of love or affection, we have next some rings known as Fed rings. And they are also types of Fed rings which experts refer to as puzzle rings. And I think if we look to the right of the screen for both rings, we can see where they get their name puzzle ring from. Now, a puzzle ring is made up of 2, 4, 6, 8, or sometimes even 12 interconnected rings. And they may have originated from the European gimel ring of the 1500s, which was a ring with 2 or 3 hoops or links that fitted together to form one complete ring. And gimel rings were often used as betrothal rings. Couples would each wear one hoop during the engagement and then rejoin the two bands together to use as a wedding ring. And the word gimel itself comes from the Latin meaning twin. So the idea of twin rings, one worn by each person, which then come together for marriage. Now, the feather ring at the top is designed with two hands clasped. And in effect, a ring with clasped hands could be a symbol of friendship, love, or betrothal. And the design itself goes back to the Roman times and became popular again in the medieval period. And the name fed, which we use nowadays, comes from the Latin meaning hands clasped in faith. And the motif represents the joining of the hands of a couple at a marriage ceremony. And this is a practice which again dates back to ancient Rome. Now, interestingly, in England, until Lord Hardwicke's 1753 Act of Marriage, there was no defined process for a marriage ceremony, and weddings were therefore governed by local custom and rituals. With the introduction of the Book of Common Prayer in 1594 under Edward VI, there was an attempt to encourage people to marry in church. But despite this, canon law prevailed, and all that was required for a marriage to take place was the mutual consent of both partners. And added into this, there could be the speaking of words expressing this consent. There could be the exchange of signs and symbols to indicate consent. There would be the holding of hands and the giving of a ring. And all of these formed part of this process of consenting to be engaged in marriage to the other person. Below, we have a slightly later ring from the 15 or 1600s. And this time we can see that it pulls out into a 5-ring puzzle ring, which when combined together creates a fed ring with two clasped hands holding a heart. And you can see that the hands themselves extend into cuffs, and these cuffs were originally decorated with colourful enamel. Now, on the inside of each ring, there is an inscription, and that inscription is hidden when the hoops are together. And the inscription on the top ring reads, "As hands be shut," i.e. hands clasped together, "so they are surely knitted together." So again, the fact that the rings combine to give a symbol of clasped hands, the fact that with the upper ring we have an inscription running around which is hidden when it is closed, and with the lower ring we have a symbol of a heart being clasped by the hands when the puzzle ring is gathered together. We have a clear expression of not only love, but probably an expression of love which forms part of a wedding ceremony. Now, continuing with the idea of affection and love being expressed between two people, we have here a rather lovely little bird. And this is a bird badge. It's a lead alloy badge in the shape of a popinjay. And it's got a little bell around its neck. The bird's feathers are clearly marked. You can see just further along the wing. There's some lovely indentations where they've inscribed the shape of the individual parts of the feather into the bird's wing, and the wingtips protrude just above its back. It's made in a mould which means that the shape would have been set into pottery or possibly another hard metal. The softer sheet of lead would then have been pressed into that mould to make the basic shape. And then there would probably have been an additional hand inscribing to add the particular details of the feather, perhaps the eye, and the decoration on the little bell. And this was found in the Thames. We can see here on the screen the front of the badge and also the back of the badge. Not as carefully worked, because this would be expected to be worn on clothing, so the back would not have been visible. On the back, we can see the British Museum number, and this, of course, gives us a clue as to when this particular object, which was made probably in the late medieval period, at any time up to about 1500, was actually found and came into the British Museum collection. 52 indicates that it came into the museum in 1852 and became part of the collection on the 29th of May and was the third object registered that day. So British Museum numbers always give you a little bit of a clue about when the object was actually found or when the object became part of the British Museum collection. Now, the popinjay itself is a symbol of love, and badges such as this might have served as lovers' tokens. The word popinjay entered English in the 1200s to mean a picture or a representation of a parrot. And we have a couple of medieval representations of parrots or popinjays, which are shown in a manuscript up in the British Library, which originally held by the British Museum before it was transferred up to the British Library in the 1980s. This is a manuscript known as the Harley manuscript, and it shows here two small images sitting amongst the text of popinjays, the bottom of which, if you were to reverse it, has a very similar shape to our lead alloy badge. And popinjays were the subject of brooches in late medieval royal circles as well. And we know that the French Queen, Jeanne de Berlin, had a brooch decorated with a cluster of 3 pearls and a lady holding a popinjay at the centre. And in the medieval mind, the popinjay was also associated with the month of May. So rather appropriate that this little particular example came into the museum collection in the month of May, a symbol of spring. Our next brooch, we're going forward several hundred years to the Victorian period, and we're looking here at a brooch made around 1850. And this brooch links into the theme of love and affection due to the fact that the turquoise with which this brooch is decorated in jewellery law is an affirmation of love. And in addition, the eyes of the bird are set with tiny rubies, which stand for passion. And the combination of turquoise with rubies is often found in jewellery designed to express sentiment. So our 1850s gold brooch is in the form of a dove, decorated with turquoise and ruby eyes. And it came to the museum in its original case. Now, in addition to the dove itself with its turquoise and ruby decoration, hanging from the beak of the dove is a small heart-shaped pendant, again decorated with turquoise, a tiny ruby in the centre, and rococo scrolls. And because the object came in its original case, we know that it was made and sold by Abraham Barber, who was a jeweller based at 56 Cheapside, London. Now, on the back of the brooch, as we can see from this bottom image, Both the bird and the heart pendant are designed with compartments which will hold hair. So when this brooch had been gifted, the person who owned the brooch would then be able to put the hair of a loved one or a relation into the back of the bird or the heart. And the compartment with the hair inside would be sealed with this small beveled piece of glass, which you can just pick out on the image, which could be levered out and then pressed back in to hold the hair. And hair would be given as a token of love or friendship. And hair is very chemically stable and long lasting. And it would be wound and knotted and then placed inside the small compartments to add individual personal meaning to a shop bought piece of jewellery expressing sentiment. So a generic symbol then becomes highly personalised by the addition of particular keepsakes, in this case hair, inside the brooch, which would be hidden from the general viewer when it was being worn, but would be held up against toward the person who was wearing the brooch. The next set of objects we're going to look at are a set of objects that were used by two ladies, Lady Elena Butler and Miss Ponsonby, who were known as the Ladies of Llangollen. And we can see a picture of them here at the top, one sitting on a chair, the other standing, holding a sprig, both wearing riding hats. And this is an illustration from an unknown publication printed around 1840. And it shows us Eleanor Charlotte Butler and Sarah Ponsonby, who both came from aristocratic families living within a few miles of each other in County Kilkenny in Ireland. They met in 1768, and 10 years later, they left Ireland together for Wales, eventually settling in Llangollen, North Wales, in a small cottage called Plasnewid, and that translates into new mansion, Plasnewid. Their rather unsympathetic relations allowed them a modest income only, and they used this at Plasnewid to make improvements to the house, hire servants, and host visitors attracted by their life and their decision to live together despite the opposition of their families, at a time when it was assumed that a woman would marry or remain single. And their house, Plasnewid, is now a museum. And some of their personal objects are held at the British Museum. And what we have in the lower image is a pair of chocolate cups used for drinking hot chocolate, each of them with a cover to keep the hot chocolate warm on its way from the kitchen to the place where it was to be consumed, marked with a network of red and gold glaze, and each cup is decorated with two panels on opposite sides. So we can see one of these panels on each cup is a small view of their house, Plasnewid, and on the other side, as we can see on the second cup, which has been turned around for the photo, we have the arms of the Butler and Ponsonby families tied together with a lover's knot on the back of the cup. The saucers themselves were decorated with gold rosettes, and each saucer was marked with their initials. And you can see here we're looking at Eleanor's, marked with EB in the centre. And both of the lids have small metal loop handles. And in fact, if you look very carefully, you will see that the lids are not identical. One was a replacement made to replace a broken lid before they came into the British Museum collection. And you can see that they're different. This is a bit like playing Spot the Difference. One of them, the dome, is lower than the one on the right, which is higher, a higher dome with two leaves in relief at the top. So this dome has been ground down and has no leaves. And if we were to open up the lid, we would see that this one is not fixed with a small bolt. It is fixed directly into the soft dome, which would then have been hardened and fired to hold the ring in place. Whereas on this cup, if we were to lift the lid, because the dome is slightly larger, there is a small metal bolt which holds the loop in place. So obviously a couple of items which were well used in real life, so well used that they were broken, but also so well loved that a replica was made and they continued in use until they passed into the British Museum collection. Now our next object is going to take us back in time. It's going to take us way back in time before the Victorian period, because we are going back to the 7th century BC. And we are looking at, here on the left, a Neo-Assyrian clay tablet, which carries 3 columns of cuneiform. So we have 2 wide columns, and then just on the broken edge to the right, we can see part of what originally would have been the 3rd column of cuneiform script. And the inscription tells us that this is from the Epic of Gilgamesh. And the Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the most significant works of ancient Mesopotamian literature. It probably originated early in the 2nd millennium BC, when a group of disconnected Sumerian stories were woven together into a single epic. And the main theme of the epic is Gilgamesh's friendship with the wild man Enkidu and their exploits together, with the later death of Enkidu and Gilgamesh's unsuccessful quest for immortality. Now, this tablet gets into our talk today because throughout the epic, up until his death, one of the key themes of the story, from their initial meeting, from their initial wrestling match, from their initial distrust of each other, and then their growing friendship and adventures in the ancient world, we have a strong theme of friendship, and indeed a hint of romantic friendship between Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Also, as part of the story, we have a love triangle. Because in one part of the story, we're told that the goddess Ishtar develops an attraction for Gilgamesh. He, however, is not interested because all of her previous lovers have suffered tragically. So he turns down his advances and incurs her wrath. The popularity of the story of Gilgamesh is proven by the fact that fragments telling the story in different languages and different scripts have been found as far afield as Turkey, Syria, and Israel. And the Epic of Gilgamesh continues to be a firm favourite for people studying the history of ancient Mesopotamia. And a lovely example of that is the object we have here on the right, because what we are looking at here is an empty beer bottle. And this empty beer bottle is a symbol of how popular and enduring discussion about and consideration of the Epic of Gilgamesh is with modern experts. On the black label, we can see the name Enkidu, Gilgamesh's companion, and the bottle, which is now empty, originally held beer brewed for the 47th International Assyrian Conference, held in Helsinki in Finland in 2001. And using ancient recipes, local brewers in Finland attempted to recreate an ancient Mesopotamian beer using a recipe found on a cuneiform document known as the Hymn to Ninkansi, who was the Mesopotamian goddess of brewing. And this brew was then part of the refreshments offered to the expert at the conference that year. And one of the empty bottles was brought by one of those experts back to the British Museum and now forms part of the British Museum collection. We're going to continue with the idea of friendship, of loyalty, between friends, between people on a joint venture with a common goal in mind with our next badge. And our next badge is known as a livery badge. This example is made in a lead alloy and it is in the shape of a seated dog. It's a type of dog known as a talbot, and it is wearing a collar indicating that it is a domesticated rather than a wild dog. And there's quite a lot of damage to this part of the object, but you can just make out the letters T and A, part of the word talbot. It was found in Bristol and dates to the 1400s. And it's a type of badge which would have been worn by members of a household to indicate their allegiance to a particular noble. So here we have an example of household or political love or loyalty. The word livery derives from the Old French livery, meaning an allowance or pay. And originally, livery referred to the clothes that a noble family gave their retinue to wear. Over time, a badge was given in place of an entire outfit. And typically, the badge would be a personal device taken from the coat of arms of the family that distributed it. Badges themselves could be made from a wide range of materials. And the kind of badge an individual wore was an indication of their economic standing, the economic standing of the noble family they were associated with, and their position within that noble's household. So, for example, an expensive gold or silver badge, perhaps inlaid with jewels, would only be worn by the family themselves. Very powerful nobles might have plain gold badges distributed to immediate household members, and then silver badges distributed to lesser household members. But most servants and retainers were given badges made from inexpensive metals, such as pewter or lead, like the example we're looking at now. And then below that, you would have cloth badges with the family device sewn onto it. And these were the cheapest type to be produced, but also because they are organic, they are the least likely to survive. Organic materials such as fabric survive very poorly in wet British archaeological soils. And therefore, this lead alloy badge is probably the best example we have of the type of badge that would have been distributed to the lower members of a household, and indeed would have been worn by members of the armed forces supported by that private household at a time in the late medieval periods when great nobles would have their own private army at their disposal. Under Henry VII, the use of livery badges was made more exclusive, and they could no longer be mass produced and widely distributed because they were now restricted to the king and the household of leading nobles. Now, this particular example probably belonged to a supporter of the Talbot family, because it shows us a Talbot, a large hunting dog, which may itself have acquired its name through the introduction of the breed into England by the Talbot family in the 1300s. So the dog is named after the Talbot family, who then adopt the dog as their device. And it was used by the family during the 1400s. Now, Sir Gilbert Talbot was one of Henry Tudor's captains at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485. And there's a rather nice comment recorded of him, which links his character directly to the device used by his family, because it is said of Gilbert Talbot that he was the Talbot who bit wondrously sore during the Battle of Bosworth. So livery badges would be distributed by a noble to people in their household as a way for those people to indicate alliance, as a way of building loyalty. And what we've got on the screen now is an object where we see exactly that same mechanism of building alliance, expressing political love and affection and loyalty through the gifting of a precious object. Now we're going to go into our 10-minute break. So I'm going to leave this image up on the screen for the 10-minute break because there's quite a lot of detail on it. What we are looking at is a page from an illuminated manuscript previously held by the British Museum, now held by the British Library. And then on the other side, a print from the British Museum, which was made at a later date, but shows us in greater detail the small image which sits on this particular page. And a couple of questions. I wonder if you can work out who this gentleman is at the bottom. There is a clue. And I wonder if you can work out what is happening, what is being given to express loyalty and alliance between the giver and the receiving couple. I will see you again in 10 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a nice comfort break, and I hope you've enjoyed looking at our image on the screen. And the question I posed before the break was, who do we think we might be looking at and what is going on? Well, if we go to the print where we can see the image in greater detail, we see someone kneeling in front of a couple. And the clue as to who this person may be is not only the sumptuous gown that they are wearing, which indicates that we are looking at someone of high status, a wealthy person, but also the fact that just behind them, they have a little dog. And this is a Talbot. And this is our clue that we are looking at John Talbot, 1st Earl of Shrewsbury, who is kneeling in front of Margaret of Anjou and King Henry VI. And he is presenting them with a book while courtiers look on. And this particular print is an illustration from a history book published in 1773 and is itself based on the illuminated manuscript, which we see here to the left, originally in the British Museum, now held by the British Library. And this manuscript is the Talbot Shrewsbury book, a collection of romances, essays, instructional texts, chronicles, and statutes compiled as a gift for Margaret of Anjou on her betrothal to Henry VI. And it was presented to her by John Talbot, who was the person who escorted her to England after her marriage in France in 1444. So interestingly, what we're looking at here is a book within a book, because this is the book. It represents the book in which the picture sits, which was itself presented by Talbot to Margaret. But the presentation is not accurate as portrayed in the book. Margaret was married to Henry by proxy in France, and therefore Talbot, when he presented the book to her in France, would have done so to her alone. She only met Henry when she arrived with Talbot as her escort in England. So I think what Talbot has done here is not only has he recorded his gift of a very expensive, unique manuscript to the new Queen of England, Margaret of Anjou, but in recording that, he has given greater importance and greater value to the act by including the king himself in the image of that presentation. So he's sort of adding value to his expression of loyalty and making sure that that act is recorded for posterity by having it included in the manuscript. So a very calculated, very political expression of allegiance to Margaret, now part of the English royal family, with the presumption that she will at some point become the mother of the next king. So also expressing loyalty to the royal family. The next object we're going to look at is an object that expresses affection, expresses devotion in the form of a piece of architecture. Because what we are looking at here is an architectural fitting in the form of a bodhisattva sitting on a lotus seed pod in a grotto in a lotus pond. The bodhisattva herself is dressed in flowing robes, jewelry, and a crown. And beside her, we can see a Buddhist disciple, his hands held together in prayer, himself kneeling on a lotus leaf. On the other side, above her, in the rocky grotto, are her attributes. So we can identify the particular bodhisattva shown in this fitting. She has a willow branch in a vase and a sutra, a manuscript, sitting on a cloth. And then above her head on the rocks, we have three characters. Here you see them in their roundels, and these read from right to left, Festival of the Lotus Pond. And attached to the back of this, and we can see in the photograph of the back of the fitting on the right hand side of the screen, there's a hollow rectangular tube which is scored with a grid of guidelines for calligraphy. Now, the calligraphy, the inscription's hard to decipher, as the glaze, which was later added, almost obscures certain characters. And in addition, the fitting has been repaired around the bottom, which conceals some of the bottom line. But what we do know from the inscription was that this architectural fitting was made for a Buddhist temple in China, and that it was presented as an offering by a whole family. So the offering was made not by an individual, but by a wealthy family who lived near to the temple. And This was part of a process which emerged in the late Ming period in China, whereby fundraising appeals were launched by monasteries and temples. And donors sought earthly gains, such as future fortune and social standing, and also with a concern for their own spiritual welfare. And they hoped to gain this by donating monies and objects to augment the buildings. And some of the buildings feature the names of successive generations within a family of benefactors, indicating that this act of giving an object as an act of devotion, an act of love, what experts call a votive offering to the temple or the monastery, was a long-term activity for that family, whereby the use of their wealth to give something which augmented the beauty of the deity's earthly home was a way of gaining credit, expressing devotion, and also hoping that you might get a little something back in return. The interesting things about votive gifts in all religions and all cultures is that it's meant to be a reciprocal act whereby you give something to the gods in honor as an expression of your devotion, and in return you are hoping that they will look favorably upon you and grant you a safe and wealthy life. Here we have another example of what we could call architectural love. This is a group of 4 ceramic tiles, and they are moulded and painted in blue and luster over a white glaze. And they're decorated with Arabic inscription in the Kufic script, and it's got elaborate knot motifs on a background of floral scrolls. Now, the tablets have been mounted by the British Museum in a single fitting, and they would indeed have been part of a longer inscription panel. They were made in Iran in the late 1200s, possibly into the early 1300s. And they're on display at the British Museum. And when you stand before them, they are a large item. They have a height of 55 centimetres, and the length of the tiles that we have at the British Museum is 190 centimetres, so almost 2 metres long. The original inscription would therefore have been longer. And it was probably mounted in a mosque, because what we have here is an inscription taken from the Quran. And it reads, "It is he who shapes you in the wombs as he pleases. There is no God but he, the Almighty, the exalted in might, the wise." So what we have here is a script which has been made manifest. So a devotion from the Quran becomes an architectural fitting, which is then placed within a mosque, which expresses love and loyalty and devotion to the one God, Allah, and also hints at another aspect of devotion to Allah, which you often see represented in mosques, and that is Allah's 99 names, his 99 attributes. Here, he is referred to as the mighty and the wise, just 2 of his attributes. Now, the idea of devotional love made manifest in objects, it's something which really we see around the world and across time. And we have here 2 objects from 2 very different parts of the world and 2 very different time periods. On the left, we have a pottery mold, possibly of the Aztec goddess Chicotl. She's wearing an elaborate headdress, a necklace, and a geometric pattern skirt. And this dates to the 1400s and was found in modern day Mexico. The goddess, Chicotl, was one of a number of Aztec motherhood and fertility goddesses. And childbirth was sometimes compared in Aztec culture to warfare, a difficult and dangerous process, and women who died in childbirth were honoured as fallen warriors. And what we have here is not the object that the person would have owned, but the mould in which the object was made. So if you look at the shadowing at the top, you can see that we are looking into a mould where we are looking down into a hole, into a recess, into which soft, wet clay would have been pressed, allowed to dry, would have slightly shrunk, would then have been knocked out to create a reverse image, a small pottery figurine of the goddess, which could then be cleaned up to remove any excess clay before it was fired, and then available as a mass-produced devotive object. And this idea of mass-produced devotive objects is also something that we see in the Roman period, because here on the right-hand side of the screen, we have a small Roman religious object found at Laken Heath in Suffolk. And it is what is known as a lar figure. This one is a type of lar known as a lar familiaris, and this is depicted as a youth in a short tunic with a sash tied around the middle. He's wearing boots, and in his left hand, he holds a double cornucopia overflowing with fruit. If you were to hold him in his hands, in your hand, he's very small. He's only 10 centimeters tall, so about palm size, about hand size. And he represents a single lar. And these are Roman protective deities or spiritual guardians. And the term is used particularly for ancestral gods of a Roman household. So what we're looking at here is a small figure which would have been part of a small household shrine set up in the family home, which was set up to honour the ancestors of the family, and also set up to honour the lars, the spirits who were believed to protect the home and the family. And in return for this honour and this devotion and this attention to their household shrine, the lars were believed to bring the family good fortune. And as we can see from these overflowing cornucopia, there was also the hope that in looking after your home, the lars would bring you good fortune and much food, and an overflowing and abundant lifestyle for yourself and your family. So again, the idea of the votive offering as a reciprocal gift on this occasion. Now, next we have a couple of objects which speak directly to next Monday, the 14th of May. And what we have here are two Valentine cards from the British Museum collection. Valentine's Day, also called St. Valentine's Day, is celebrated annually on the 14th of February. And it originated as a Christian feast day, honouring one or two early Christian martyrs named Saint Valentine. Later on, in folk tradition, it became a significant cultural, religious and commercial celebration of romance and love in many regions of the world. And indeed, the celebration of St. Valentine in a romantic connotation is seen in Chaucer's poem about Valentine's Day, written in the 1300s. And by the 1700s, it had grown into an occasion in which couples expressed their love by presenting flowers, confectionery, and sending greetings cards, such as the two we see here on screen. And the one to the left is a Valentine's card dating to around 1850. It's handmade with embroidered birds, flowers, and butterflies inside a cut, embossed paper lace border, decorated with a garland of flowers. And then the message is just down the bottom on this blue panel. And the message reads, "To a dear one." And as with all Valentine's cards, it would have then opened up with space inside for a personal individual message to be written by the usually mysterious giver to the recipient. On the other side, we see a Valentine's card which dates to 1874, and it shows two women and a girl in a doorway with another woman looking out of a window nearby. And they are greeting a small boy holding a card with wings. And it was designed by Walter Crane, who was a leading figure in the arts and crafts movement. And the cards, such as this one, which were printed based on his design, were printed by Edmund Evans, who was based at Fleet Street in London. And the little figure, the little messenger on the doorway, is holding a card on which we can just see the beginning of the inscription, Miss, so to be delivered to an unmarried lady, younger or older. And the little messenger is shown as the ancient deity Cupid, a deity of love, believed to be the son of the goddess Venus, the goddess of love, shown here with his wings and with Cupid's bow and arrow, which he would fire to fill someone with passionate desire. And here, this motif from the ancient world has been combined with the modern idea of the Victorian Postal Service to augment the idea of love being conveyed and love being delivered as part of the Valentine celebrations. Now, we also said that today we were going to be looking at not only love as an expression between people, but love as an expression to the deities, which we've seen with the votive offerings, but also love towards a place or a process. And what we have here are some objects in the British Museum collection which feature a character known as Hello Kitty. And Hello Kitty was created in 1974 by a Japanese publishing company for use on greetings cards and was later developed for more general merchandising purposes. And from the 1990s, the company started using the character in the production of souvenirs, with Hello Kitty dressed in local costumes and participating in local events such as festivals. And these products were then sold exclusively in the associated area. So to the left, we have a small cotton flannel with two Hello Kitty characters dressed as pilgrims, one in pink and one in blue, both holding a straw hat and a walking staff. They're standing on a sandy area with grass and flowers behind them. And then in the background, we have our clue to the location for this particular souvenir. Because in the background, we see the Seto Oshi suspension bridge. And across the bottom, Hello Kitty, and the place name of this souvenir, Shikoki. And then right at the bottom, the copyright information. Because Hello Kitty is greatly loved by the company who publish her. She brings them much revenue and there are very strong copyright rules around where and when her image can be used. Commercial love. Now, the island, Shikoku, is one of the 5 main islands of Japan. It's historically been rather isolated and has therefore kept its traditional culture, including many ancient Buddhist temples. And it's famous for its 88 temple pilgrimage, which was established in the 800s. Now, most modern day pilgrims travel by bus rather than by foot, as our 2 Hello Kitty figures are. But this flannel would have been produced as a souvenir for pilgrims to the island to buy, as a reminder of their visit, as a reminder of the act of devotion and love that they had undertaken in terms of their pilgrimage around the different temples. So very closely linked to a set of behaviours expressing affection, the pilgrimage, and also linked to that behaviour taking place in a particular place. So the love of the island and of the temples visited. On the other side, we see Hello Kitty again, and this time she's on a red envelope. And this red envelope is a lucky money envelope given as a gift during holidays or on special occasions such as weddings, graduations, or the birth of a baby. Now, this gesture of affection may date back to the Han Dynasty, so may date back as far as 200 BC, when a coin would be inscribed with auspicious words such as "May you live a long and successful life," and would be given to ward off evil spirits. Now, from the Tang Dynasty, the Chinese New Year was considered to be the beginning of spring. And in addition to congratulations, elders would give money to children to ward off evil spirits. And this evolved into the custom of giving children lucky money, coins threaded together with red string. Now, due to the fact that there are no holes in modern coins, and therefore coins cannot be strung together as a gift, the use of red envelopes became prevalent. And as well as coins, elders would now put folded banknotes into the envelopes as a gift, expressing affection, and also as a gift to bring good luck. This particular lucky red envelope dates to 2005, and on the back, it incorporates a scratch card element, whereby you can scratch off one of these flowers, and underneath you will find a lucky inscription. We also have Hello Kitty on the back, wearing a butterfly costume to represent the Spring Festival, the time of spring around the Chinese New Year. And then we also see that the repeated word love is used across the back of the envelope and the front of the envelope as part of the decoration. And this particular red money envelope was used. It was donated to the British Museum by a British Museum member of staff who had originally used these envelopes to give money to her 3 grandchildren as New Year's gifts in 2005. And there are a selection of these money envelopes, this being just one of them, that were given in 2005, and the others can be found at the British Museum Collections Online database. Continuing on with the idea of love of place, we're going to look at a small souvenir, a trifle from Yarmouth. Now, the word souvenir, as we use it nowadays, comes from the French word for a remembrance or a memory. So it's a token of remembrance, an object that a person acquires for the memories that the owner associates with it. this souvenir can be an object that's collected or purchased and is then transported home by the traveller as a memento of a visit. The object itself may have intrinsic value based on what it's made from, or it can be a symbol of an experience. And without the owner's input, the specific symbolic meaning is lost. So with this particular example, we know we have an object produced to be sold in Yarmouth, to be sold to people who are visiting the coastal town, who will then take this object, which is a porcelain inkwell, and you can see here at the top the 4 holes for dipping the pen and the hole at the top for pouring the ink in. So bought as a souvenir, which could then be used every day as a reminder of that visit to Yarmouth, but without additional information attached to the object. What we don't have is any specific understanding of who exactly bought it, whether they bought it themselves or were gifted it by someone who was with them on the journey, the nature of the journey, or indeed the date of the journey. We know that the object was made around 1756. So we have an object which probably became a souvenir, i.e. passed into someone's possession around that time, and is now a reminder of that process of collecting souvenirs in the British Museum collection. So I hope you have enjoyed today our quick journey through some objects from the British Museum collection that express love, affection, loyalty and friendship. All of these objects are on the British Museum collection online database if you want to look any of them up. And in terms of the search box, good ways to get into objects such as these where the understanding of the object isn't linked to the object name is to use key themes such as love, affection, allegiance, and these then pull the objects out using the text written by the curators as part of the collection entry. If there are particular objects you want to look at, so if you want to particularly look, say, at pottery molds or at inkwells, then you can use the name of the object itself, but that will then pull up those objects from a range of different contexts and a range of different times. But some wonderful objects to be found on the collections online database. So now we have come to the end of our talk. I spotted at least one question. So if you have any other questions you would like to ask or any thoughts you would like to add to our workshop today, I'd be delighted to have a chat. Thank you, Malcolm.
Thank you very much for the very, very positive responses to your talk there, Katharine.
Thank you.
Right, so let me go to, I saw there's some questions earlier on that came up, didn't they? So how were the lead brooches attached to the clothing?
Oh, that's a very good question, isn't it? Because on the back of that particular example, there was no indication of how it would be attached. Sometimes what you have with a lead badge, and in particular with what are known as pilgrims badges, which were souvenirs collected at a particular shrine or place of worship by the pilgrim and then worn on their clothing. The badge is pierced, so you can imagine that it could have been sewn through and sewn directly onto the clothing. What you also find is that sometimes they will have a bar across the back, so that again, that bar could be sewn onto the clothing or slipped onto the clothing, a bit like a modern brooch. Because these objects are made from very soft materials, they're often quite badly damaged. And the fact that this one was found in the Thames means it was probably washed up from the Thames and found on the shores of the Thames during a mudlarking expedition where people go down to see what's been washed up. And therefore the back fitting is no longer on the badge. Because there's no piercing in it, I'm going to make an educated guess. I'm going to have a hypothesis that that badge I believe originally would have had some sort of bar across the back, which could have been used for sewing or for slotting, particularly onto a thick outer garment. The depth of the fabric would have held the badge in place.
Thank you very much. The ladies of Laganagan Club, did you say one of the ring-shaped handles of the lids was bolted on? Are the rings pottery or metal? Was this a common or fashionable on pottery at the time? They look like wedding rings.
Yeah, no, I saw that question earlier, and I think that is actually a really good comment to make. So let's begin with the technical first. Chocolate cups are a particular type of drinking vessel that are made with a lid to keep the beverage hot. The process of making hot chocolate would have involved actually taking chocolate off a chocolate bar and then melting it into milk. That would then have been whisked up to get a frothy head, a bit like a modern cappuccino, would have been poured into the cup and carried to the living space, the lounge, where it would be drunk. And it was most usually drunk in the morning. So the lid not only kept it hot while it was being transported, but also prevented that foamy head from collapsing while it was being taken to the drinker. Because there was a lid on it, the drinker would then need to lift that lid off. Now, if you touch the porcelain that it's made from, that porcelain may be warm. You don't want to burn yourself. And in addition, the shape isn't really very conducive for picking up with the fingers, particularly with a high glaze on it. So the little handle at the top was quite simply a device for safely lifting the lid off. Now, because that ring is quite large, so that you can grasp it between your finger and thumb, it would have been quite heavy. It's made of porcelain and then it's got a gold glaze on it. Anywhere on a piece of pottery where you have two pieces joined together, particularly where one of those pieces is quite heavy, you have a weak point. So originally the bolt would have been used not only to join the ring on, but also to strengthen that joint. In a lot of ancient statues where the arms are broken off, you'll see that there's a hole in the core of the limb where they would have put in a metal dowel to support the statue. So the metal bolt was to fix and to strengthen. The reason the other one didn't have it was because that was the replacement one, and the dome at the top was much smaller, and the ring would have been made as part of that replacement lid. So the construction process was different. In terms of wedding rings, I think that is an excellent comment. And this is one of the things where objects are such a delight to learn about and think about, because there's often several ways they can be interpreted. And as long as you've got the evidence there, you can put forward different hypotheses. And I think one hypothesis might well be that those gold rings are symbolic wedding rings at a time when the two ladies of Llangollen were in an emotional relationship which was not recognised in any formal sense. So they could not have married, they would not have worn wedding rings, but I really like those ideas that those gold rings, which they saw every morning when they drank their morning cup of chocolate, sort of symbolised that gold ring, which was a symbol, as we've heard, that goes back to Roman times, which in their mind was a symbol of their relationship that they recognised, even if it was not recognised by their family, the wider community, or the state at that time. Lovely comment.
Thank you, Catherine. Are the puzzle rings still made? They're quite engaging.
Oh, that's a very good question. There are no modern examples of puzzle rings. When I first saw them, when I was collecting images for this talk, the thing that they reminded me of were those Chinese puzzles that you used to get in crackers, where you sort of had to get the rings all apart from each other, sort of a bit like a magic trick. I didn't find any puzzle rings in our collection that went past the Georgian period. Once you get into the Victorian period, I did not find any Victorian puzzle rings or modern puzzle rings. Whether nowadays you can buy them on handcrafted sites such as Etsy, whether the tradition continues amongst goldsmiths, I don't know. Interesting question. I'm going to go and look that up after the talk. But none in the British Museum. Perhaps if I find one, I'll buy it and donate it. So we've got a modern example for the next time someone does a talk about puzzle rings.
Thank you, Catherine. I think that's all the questions that we've got for today. So if there's no more questions, we will see you in a fortnight's time, off next week, back with the week after. Thank you very much, Catherine. That was fantastic. I learned loads today, loads. That was brilliant.
You're most welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. See you in a fortnight.